Okay. All right. Well, hello everyone. We've got a what should be a very interesting discussion today about publication ethics, and where we're going with publication, particularly with respect to early career researchers. So, I guess if we start out by introducing ourselves, it might be a good idea. So, Steph, would you like to kick off?
Thanks. So I'm Stefan Yerby. I'm a PhD student in veterinary science and public health with a focus on dairy nutrition. Aside from that, I work at DEFRA as a project manager for the UK Dairy Carbon Network, and I'm chair of the Early Career Council for BSAS.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Jaap van Milgen. I'm a researcher at INRAE in France, working mostly on monogastric nutrition. But I'm here as my role as a chairman of the Animal Consortium, the consortium of the EAAP, the BSAS, and INRAE that publishes the animal journals, animal open space, and animal science proceedings.
Yeah, thanks, Jaap. And most important to recognise that Jaap said animal, not animals.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
And we'll come back. We'll come back to that in a moment. And my name's Nick Jonsson, and I'm here in my capacity as BSAS Vice President. But I've also recently had the experience of being inducted as the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Dairy Research, which is the journal of the Hannah Dairy Research Foundation. And so it's a non-profit organisation that returns the proceeds from the publication into the to research, primarily in the UK. Prior to that, I've been an academic at the University of Glasgow, and I'm a veterinarian. I work in animal production quite broadly, mostly with cattle. So, introductions over. Steph, this is kind of your pigeon. So, tell us what made you what was the original motivation to have a discussion about this, or to get people thinking about it?
Thanks, Nick. So I think we all recognize in research, academia, the importance of publishing. In my first year as an undergrad, we were taught publish or perish. I think that is very pertinent. But as PhD students and early career researchers, there are several barriers to publishing. I feel like the timescales with reviewing, clarity around exactly what journals want to publish. We all can acknowledge the importance of null results to the scientific conversation, but at the same time, many manuscripts are rejected for lack of novelty. Journals want excitement, and I feel like associating excitement with robust science may not be the most positive attitude. My very wise PhD supervisor has instilled in me the importance of humble science. And I feel like there is a bit of ambiguity from journals as to exactly what we should be aiming to publish, where we should be aiming to publish it in. And I think as early career researchers, we can contribute to journals as reviewers, and a reviewer training program would be an excellent addition. With review times are especially problematic for early career researchers because we only have 3 years or 3.5 years to complete our PhD. And although in the handbook of some universities, we are told that we do not need to publish to complete our thesis, and our PhD supervisors should not put any pressure upon us to publish. But then 2 pages later, it says, if you want to be a successful academic, you must publish. So I think really we need some assistance and some guidance as to how we can contribute to that whole process, and some clarity about how more senior academics and the company here today can help us on that journey.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. So I think that's pretty clear. Yeah, do you want to give an initial response? I've got a couple of questions that arise from that I'd like to put back to Steph. But have you got an initial response to?
Yeah, I think there are many questions that we can address today. But I think when I was thinking about it, when I was a young scientist, was it as important as it is now Because when I was doing my PhD 35 years ago, we had to send out paper copies, 3, 4, 5 copies, I think, to a journal, and then the journal sent it out to reviewers. I don't think they even solicited reviewers. They just sent it out, and it probably came back weeks later. And I don't think that I had the pressure when I was a young scientist, as early career scientists feel it as it is now. And I've been asking myself the question, why is it now? I mean, who's putting this pressure on young early career scientists? And well, that's basically employers, academic employers who want, or post or doctoral schools who say you have to have a paper published. So for me, that is basically the reason that we have to team up also with not just between journals and authors, but also with academia, who basically set these rules of, well, you have to have 1, 2, or 3 papers. You have to have a long CV with publications on it. They are part of this this effort that we're talking about now to publish. And the publish or perish has existed for a long time, but I think the pressure that you're feeling now in terms of timing is especially coming from making a career in academics.
Yeah, so thanks, Jaap. I agree. I remember my first paper, wrapping it up and posting it away to Boxmeer in the Netherlands, and the great excitement of sending it away to the Netherlands in an envelope, and then getting back sometime later, corrections being proposed and accepted. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was sort of more exciting than just pressing a button and away it goes. I think there are some really interesting questions about that. One of the things that you mentioned, Steph, is the time scale. And I think you could have expanded on that. It's not just the timescale, it's the timescale and the fact that you kind of only get one shot at it, right? So if you get your negative results, if you've got a thesis with a paper, a study that you do that gets a negative result, and it's actually confirming suspicions that you might have got a negative result and therefore not particularly surprising, but there isn't that much in the literature, you're certainly making theoretically, if we try to address the replication crisis and all the rest of it, then that's a valid contribution. But I think that's particularly the type of work that you would have some concerns with. And as a PhD student, you've really only got one shot at it. Like your study might take a year or a year and a half to do, and if it turns out unexciting, then that's it, I guess. Is that?
And we're often not working in the same scale with the same funding that larger or more established research are working with. So perhaps that affects the probability of us finding a null result of limited excitement. But I think having equal weight to robust science that you can demonstrate has been performed in a rigorous way with sufficient power, that should be, in my opinion, that contributes to the scientific conversation, regardless of whether you have significance.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is something that I feel, I've got strong views on, which may change over time. The longer I'm in this role as an editor, who knows? But how do you feel about the requirement for novelty and significant results when you're considering the whether or not to send a paper out for review?
Yeah, I think that really depends on the journal, what the journal wants, because good research, basically there's no reason not to publish research results. And there's always a platform, a journal that will accept publications somewhere. But certain journals, and I think the top journals, they are selective, like Nature and Science. I mean, they are much more selective than we are. But just repeating a study that was done already many times, it may not be sufficient for a journal to say, okay, it's good research and it's sound research. It merits to be published, but perhaps not in the specific journal.
So just to, before you go on with that, I agree with you completely. And for me, the criteria there would be if it has been repeated many times, and nothing has changed since it was repeated previously in the environment in which the study might be conducted, or the product might be used, or a technique might be developed, then completely agree with you. And it's that, for me, it's sometimes difficult to work out, is this a controversial topic? Is this a topic which has not been settled? And I think that's that's the question that we would ask in that situation. Is that, would you agree with that?
And basically that's why we set up a separate journal from Animal a couple of years ago. It's called Animal Open Space, where we say, if the research is repeatable, well performed, it has interesting results, but it's not novel. Let's provide a platform where researchers can publish their research with the data, because the open data was very important for us. But we feel some reluctance of authors to publish the data with their results. And so Open Space for us is an experimental journal where we say, if it's well done, if it's repeatable with the data, you can publish it there. And I can give you an example. A few weeks ago, I was looking at what has been done in terms of lysine requirements in growing pigs. I could, with Clarivate, I could find 1,600 papers published. So you can do another one, and it probably has value, but the marginal value is, of course, very, very limited. But it merits to be published because money was spent, time was spent on this, and it has value. But the marginal value is very limited. So I think that's why we provided that other journal to say it's good research, but it's not novel. And we restrict Animal to really things that are novel, groundbreaking, that provide new ideas.
Okay, so that's part of the policy, that the two journals work in a complementary way. That you've got the one which has your novel and your potentially high profile element, and I guess I can understand that makes perfect sense from a strategic perspective too, because I hate to I forget the rule that says when a metric becomes a KPI for someone, it becomes useless as a metric. But that certainly applies with impact factors, and unfortunately, we can't afford to ignore them as editors of a journal. And no matter how much we might disagree with the fundamental tenet of them, they have an unfortunate impact on the journal. So is that with the animal stable, that's part of the consideration, that you've got one which you're going to preserve, maximize the performance in those according to those metrics, and then you've got the capacity to maintain that other. And
in the beginning, with Animal Open Space, we said, well, we would like to do without an external peer review. We would not have a journal which is with an editorial team just looking if the research is well done, repeatable, and then it can be published rapidly. I mean, the idea was to do it within 2 or 3 weeks. When we set it up and we applied for an impact factor, Clarivate said, well, if there's no external peer review, you will not be indexed. You will not get an impact factor. And we discussed this with the team, with the consortium. Do we really need an impact factor? And many authors, their employers require that you publish, that they publish in a journal with an impact factor. So even though we don't like it, it is still practice. That it's part of the game for now.
Yeah, this is great, Jaap. I'd like to come back to that topic, because I think it's something I've been thinking about too, in a similar sort of vein, because which is, why do we do peer review? And you've just given probably one of the best answers for that. I wanted to ask you, Steph, before we move on from this, why do you want publications?
I think it's important to be able to showcase your work, and the standard of your work can be defensible to the scientific community, which I think is what good peer review provides. But at the same time, I guess there is a very important career development factor of publications, is that it is generally in research what you were judged against. So you're going to be judged against what you published and where you've published it. And the second point of that, I think there is a bit of a problem there when we're looking at big journals and novelty publishing, because if you've published scientific work in a journal and it's been peer reviewed, I don't know that as much weight should be placed upon which journal it's in, as long as it's not a predatory one.
When we use the term predatory journal, we probably need to be a little bit cautious about that. I mean, Jaap, do you want to comment on the concept of a predatory journal?
Yeah, it's not a black or white issue. Because even what some may consider predatory journals, I have respected colleagues who publish in these journals, and there are good papers in these journals. I think the main reason why they are there now is because of the attractive economic business model that's behind it. I mean, it's low risk. I mean, you ask authors to pay for it. You don't have to find subscribers as in the past. So the financial risk is low. And many people, many organizations saw this as an opportunity just to gain money, which differs from learned societies who own journals, who have been in this business for, some of them have been in business for more than 100 years. They are there for the science. They get income through the APC, the article processing charge, but they put that money back into science. And I think that makes a big difference. And many, many readers and authors are unaware of this, of the fact that there are journals who are owned by learned society or research organizations, and other journals are fully owned by publishers who are sometimes there just to get money, to make money.
On that point, I think it's worth noting that organisations like the Hannah Dairy Research Foundation and the British Society of Animal Science, BSAS, does obtain significant amount of their income that enables the conferences, events, seminars, the whole activity to be operated. Whereas from these journals that operate outside that learned society system, none of that money flows back into the scientific community. Sure, they provide opportunities for people to be editors and authors and so on. But that comes back to this. So, Steph, on the question of what criteria are important for a publication, which journal it goes into, to what extent do you think the criteria differ between I guess what I was going to do here is try to lead into one of my own personal pet topics, which is the conflict or the potential conflict between the value of publication for an old person like me as a supervisor, or a mid-career researcher as a supervisor, and an early, like a PhD student, early career researcher. And so in my situation, it's well, not so much now because I don't have a sort of a proper academic post that I have to sort of manage. But previously, it would be much better for me to publish your work in one big article in a very big paper, in a very big journal with a high impact factor, right? So some students' work, their whole PhD thesis could be encapsulated in a single paper, and that would go to some journal that was very selective, and that would be really good for me because that would be the kind of paper that would go into the research excellence framework, high profile paper. But from a student's perspective, I get the impression that you still got slightly different motivators, because you're firstly going for number of papers as a metric rather than the quality of paper to some extent. And it's about, particularly if you're trying to do a submission of a PhD thesis by publication, you've got, still got this concept of one paper per chapter. Do you want to, is that something you thought about, that different pressure on the different parts of your team?
Agreed. And I very much appreciate the importance of quality over quantity, but I think an important part of that as well is the learning. So my first paper, which is published in Animal Open Space, is not of the same quality or writing quality. I think the data is great inside of it. But I'm on my 6th paper, and I can write in a much more succinct and eloquent style because of the writing process between the first and the last. So I think, as well as having multiple chapters and papers, there is value to, when you're in this PhD stage or early career stage, to having the safety, I guess, and supervision, close supervision, that can allow you to evolve in that process that you wouldn't necessarily get if you combined it all in one paper at the end of a 4-year PhD project.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think the imperative that your supervisors are going to have to contribute to that writing process is different if you're preparing chapters than if you're preparing something for publication. I think that people are a lot more protective about what goes out. I have to admit, I had a similar experience when I did my PhD after being in practice for 7 years, and I came back as a fairly cocky first year PhD student, and wrote a whole lot of stuff. And I remember my supervisor went through and put red lines. It was pen and ink, wrote, this is, basically rewrote the whole damn thing. And I thought, what would he know? And anyway, so of course I ignored half of his stuff, and I submitted it to a good journal. That was the one that I sent away to Boxmeer, and it came back, of course, reviewed, and they made exactly the same comments that my supervisor did. And I thought, okay, that's definitely a lesson learnt there. So yeah, I think that's an important point. So it is an iterative and process to become a good writer. Yeah. Can I come back to the question of why do we do peer review?
It's very good.
Apart from the answer you just gave, that Clarivate says you have to, otherwise you get no impact factor.
Yeah, and the review process itself is very variable. I mean, and we've all had papers accepted where the reviewers didn't do their job, and we were disappointed by the quality of the peer review because it was not very constructive or even to the point. It was mostly editorial. And I've been wondering really whether we should maintain it in the long run. I think certain journals, I mean, the top journals want to make some filtering on what they accept and what they don't accept. But I've been very much in favor of a post-print review, not by reviewers but by readers, because I mean, as a journal, you find 2 reviewers. They may do a good review, they may do a bad review, but that's it. That you're stuck with that. I think if we could engage in a discussion with readers about the quality of a paper, which somebody should start, and then the author can respond to that. He cannot change his paper anymore because it was printed, it was published. But I think we get a much more constructive dynamics of scientific discussions. We tried that with Animal Open Space. We said we don't need external reviewers pre-print. We'd like to engage in discussions, post-print discussions on a paper, but the community was not ready for it. And I think that is something, and not everybody agrees with my opinion, but I think it would be much more interesting to have this post-print discussion on the quality of a scientific word for all of us, for not just for the readers, but also for the authors. I've seen papers that were published 50 years ago. I would love to make a comment on that paper, and just to warn them they did this, but it was not. I don't think that it should be done as it was done. I think that makes it much more lively and much more interesting than just having 2 people who provide some comments on the quality of the paper.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And one of the things that's really, I guess, I guess it has surprised me is the 2 things. One is how difficult it is to find reviewers, people who are prepared to give their time to review, and using the AI-based tools that we have, which assist in identifying potential reviewers, we can sometimes get an insight into how many papers an individual publishes and how many reviews they might have done in the past too. And I'd say that these two figures are not very closely correlated. There's a fairly weak relationship between the number of papers people cite. So and it's possible that there's even an inverse correlation between those, inverse relationship between the two things. I don't know. And the second thing has been the quality of the reviews when we do get them. And I think we, on average, I would be thinking that we put out about 8 to 10 invitations to review to get 2 reviews. And there's probably a 50% chance that at least one of those reviews will be more or less useless. And then we'll have to go back to another review. I mean, is that I mean, probably shouldn't compare metrics on in this sort of open forum, but that's I mean, is this broadly what you're seeing? Yeah.
Yes.
So
no,
Steph,
and I think what has changed, I mean, the whole review process by itself, I mean, in the past, 20, 30 years ago, readers basically had confidence in scientific journals. It was peer-reviewed, therefore it was quality research. I mean, rightly or wrongly so, but that was, I mean, it was published in that journal, and that journal is a good quality journal. So it was true, it was taken as is. It shouldn't have been the case in the past. It's not the case right now, but that's why I said that right now anything can be published. And I think most research, if the research is done correctly, I think it merits publication. I had a colleague who often said that research that is not published is research that was not done. Because it was not finished. And I think he's right. I mean, so there are opportunities to publish, and all the research that was done and funded by public funding should be published. But the reader should be much more aware of the quality. The reader, I mean, scientific audience, they can judge the quality, but non-scientific quality of people who are not experts in our field can just say, hey, it's published, it was peer-reviewed. Yeah, okay, well, what does it really mean? So it changes the responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think personally, I think that I completely agree with your position. Where I'd like to be is in a position where I can say, let's assess the scientific merit of this paper on the basis of its potential reproducibility, given the information that's been provided, and the relationship between the conclusions that have been drawn, the original aims and objectives, and whether the methodology would enable the conclusions that have been made to be drawn from it. And to me, that is fundamental. It's almost a binary quality of reproducibility. Whereas quality then takes into consideration other variables or other dimensions, like its novelty, or its potential impact, or how nicely written it is, and so on. So I think we've got these different coordinates that we should be assessing things on. We have peer review from one, but not necessarily for all of them. And I think there's also potential for bringing peer review in for specific questions on papers, rather than, review the whole paper, please, correct all the grammar, as opposed to saying, hey, expert, can you tell me, is this a legitimate assumption to make? Because the whole paper hangs on that assumption. I can assess this part and this part, but I don't know the validity of that assumption. So I kind of think we need to start thinking about more pinpointed peer review for specific aspects of the paper.
That's basically what we ask for. A reviewer should not worry about grammar and that kind of stuff. I mean, you can have 10 pages of grammar that's basically worthless. I mean, that kind of comment. It's really about the core of the paper. Is the methodology right to test the hypothesis, and then does the discussion and the conclusion support what they found? That's what a reviewer should do. And I think, Steph, you mentioned that the training. I think we sometimes, some people offer training to write papers, but to review papers is different. And I think I just discussed this also with the editor-in-chief of Animal, and I think that is something we should work on, because especially for early career scientists, critical reading of a paper is different from writing. It helps you in writing, but it's different. And I think that's something that we have perhaps ignored too much so far.
It's definitely a multifaceted skill for an early career researcher. You know, we're taught that we should be able to critically analyze science, and we should do that in our literature reviews or our meta-analyses. But I think wrapping that into a need that as a scientific community, we need reviewers before we get to the stage we're at community review. So why not offer some training, wrangle in the early career researchers who are keen to publish? And I know I've spoken to Cled about, you know, building some sort of scheme where early career researchers can potentially get a shorter review time for their papers in exchange for acting as reviewers. But to do that, we need to be confident in our ability to review. And I think we need some training on how to do that.
Yeah, very good. So, Steph, you mentioned one word. We need to wind up fairly shortly. You mentioned the meta-analysis word, and I have to admit that you know, meta-analysis right up there, very high in the hierarchy of knowledge at the moment. But I know from my perspective as an editor and also as a supervisor, you know, like they're quite difficult to make a meta-analysis into a nice paper. And I'm just wondering, I'd like to ask both of you very quickly what you think about how we manage meta-analyses from a publication perspective. Yeah, so that's the question is. So Jaap, I mean, you probably get a lot of meta-analyses now. Yeah. How do you deal with it?
I think Animal is one of the journals that get more meta-analyses than most journals, and I think we welcome them very much because I think they are a real contribution in science. It's the quantification, what you can do otherwise in a qualitative literature review. Here you put the numbers together, and it takes a lot of time to do that, to establish the database, and which is why we push very much for open data as well. But as apart from having access to the information that is in the publications, excuse me, that are being used in the meta-analysis, the coding of which the meta-analyzer does it himself, him or herself, is really important, because he or she will provide a view on, well, I classify certain types of studies, and that is really important. And of course, it's a huge amount of work, and what people basically do is provide data, open data. So we also welcome that authors of meta-analyses publish their database with the publication, because again, I mean, that amount of literature that will be published on a specific topic will increase, and views may change a little bit, but with meta-analysis you really get a quantitative overview. But there remains a judgment to be made. I mean, if we take a paper from the 60s where they use 2 or 3 cows, and how do you compare that with a study where you have tens or hundreds of cows? I mean, you have to weigh, but that's a judgment that the author has to make. How does he weigh in certain results? And I think that is very interesting, and that's open for debate with the audience and with reviewers if they agree with that approach. But for me, there's a huge value in it, because no single study is going to give us the answer that we're looking for.
Yeah, so I'm inclined to agree, Steph, with so systematic reviews, meta-analyses. What are the challenges you've found? I mean, it's pretty early days, I guess, in some respects, but what challenges just in preparing it or writing in that sort of space have you faced, do you think?
I mean, I agree. I definitely agree that they contribute a huge amount. And I think writing them is a skill in itself. We can all write a narrative review, and they can go down hypothetical tangents that may not be that useful. But I think following rigorous guidelines like PRISMA for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, being able to follow that and consolidate research and then put some statistics on it, so having numerical numbers instead of just words, I think is really valuable. It is a vast amount of work, but I think in the first year of your PhD, digging into a meta-analysis or writing a systematic review is such a baptism into your subject area that it would be a valuable thing for first year or second year PhD students to do.
Thank you. And I realize. Oh, sorry, go, yeah.
Yeah, no, and especially in the context of today, with where animal experiments are being are challenged. When I looked for the publication landscape in animal and veterinary science, I saw that we nowadays publish 12,000 papers a year in animal and veterinary science. Maybe 7 years it was 6,000 papers a year. So if we want to justify animal experiments and we say, well, we publish already 12,000 papers a year, I think we have to have very good arguments to the public to say we need this experiment because the answer was not in these papers. And of course, as you say, Steph, I think that would be great if during the first year we first do an in-depth analysis of the literature, qualitatively or quantitatively through a meta-analysis, and then see, do we really need this experiment? Is it justified?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I think we're getting very close to time when Steph has to disappear. I've got heaps more questions. Jaap, I'm hoping that we can pick up on a few discussion points after the session, because I think we share some challenges. And Steph, you and I obviously have to catch up for other purposes afterwards. I did have a question. I was going to ask you, Steph, whether you thought that having papers published, coming back to Jaap's point about the validity of science that's been peer reviewed, as a PhD candidate going through an examination process, if you've got papers published, do you feel that that means that PhD examiners should refrain from criticizing or otherwise correcting your work?
No, I absolutely don't think it invalidates the Viva. But I think, again, it's a valuable skill because you've already been through the process of defending your work. And it's different having externals defending your work. You know, we build relationships with our supervisors, and it's a bit closer to home when your supervisor suggests changes. But to have an anonymous person critique your work challenges you to think a bit wider about it. So I think actually to have a good Viva and to be able to defend your work, having been through peer review, is absolutely excellent.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you very much for that, Stefan. Of course, now you've mentioned the anonymous word. That's another point for discussion subsequently. My view is always I would like to write when I review a paper, I want it to be so that I'm happy to write my name on it as well. You know, if I write a paper, I'm happy to have my name attached to that. And I kind of, so I'm not a great, I don't think anonymity is necessarily the, should be an assumed part of our process, because it's hard to manage. All right. Thank you so much for that. I actually really enjoyed this discussion. I hope it's useful. And we should probably wrap it up, I think.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you.